You know, when your request to delve into H.H.Holmes and this whole murder castle thing came through, I gotta admit, I was hooked right away, like a killer architect during the Chicago World's Fair. It's like history and true crime all rolled into one.
Yeah, and you know what I find fascinating? You've given us so much to work with. Articles, court documents, even pieces of The Devil in the White City. Clearly, you're not messing around. You want the deep dive on this, ready to go for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So, picture this. 1893, the World's Fair is in full swing. Electricity is this new marvel. People are walking around, seeing inventions, feeling that sense of progress.
Right. And meanwhile, you've got H.H. Holmes
Lurking in the background.
building his own twisted version of progress, I guess you could say. Because this wasn't just some, back alley thug. Holmes had a pharmacy. Everyone thought he was a real doctor. That's part of what makes it so creepy. He knew how to blend right in.
So, even before any murders, there's this mask of being normal. Was that like a common thing for killers back then, or is this a home specialty?
Honestly, it's something you see a lot. Think about it. Someone who's charming, puts on a good act, they're not going to raise suspicions, right? But the fact that while he's doing this, Holmes is also building this crazy elaborate murder castle, well, it tells you there was a lot going on in his mind, wouldn't you say?
Multiple levels of messed up, that's for sure. But before we get into the whole murder castle itself, I'm kind of curious about his early life. You mentioned we've got these court documents. What do those tell us about his childhood?
Well, they paint a picture of young Herman Webster Mudgett. That was his birth name, by the way. Born in New Hampshire, 1861. And get this, they say he was, like, unsettlingly smart, even as a kid. There are stories about him being way too curious, almost obsessive, and kind of manipulative. Not your average kid stuff.
So are we talking like those early signs of something dark, maybe?
Tough to say, for sure, obviously. But being manipulative like that, it often goes along with certain personality disorders, like what we call narcissistic personality disorder now.
That's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. What's it actually mean, clinically speaking?
It's more than just being selfish. It's this deep down belief that you're better than everyone, this need to be admired, and zero empathy for others. To them, people are just tools to get what they want. And that kind of lines up with how Holmes used people his whole life, even as a kid.
Okay, so then he goes to medical school. You'd figure someone learning to heal people, they wouldn't be into, well, murder.
You'd think so, right? But it's kind of creepy. It seems like his medical training actually made his dark side worse. He got fixated on anatomy, especially dissection, and that's where it gets really bad. He started robbing graves.
Grave robbing. Wait, I thought this guy was supposed to be a respectable doctor.
Never judge a book by its cover, right? And he wasn't stealing bodies for kicks. He used them for insurance fraud. He'd take out policies on made-up people, use the stolen bodies to fake their deaths, and collect the money.
That is cold. Even in death, he's exploiting people.
Exactly. And that's important to remember as we go forward because it shows just how little he cared about other people. He'd do anything to get ahead, even if it meant hurting the people who were already hurting. That total lack of respect for human life, that's what eventually leads him to Chicago. And that's where he builds his masterpiece of horror, the Murder Castle.
Okay, the murder castle. Even just saying it gives me the chills. Can you set the scene for us? What was so freaky, so terrifying about this building?
Okay, imagine this. It's this huge, sprawling, three-story building. Looks like a regular hotel from the outside. But Holmes, on the inside, he turned it into this messed-up maze designed to kill. Hidden rooms, soundproof chambers, secret passageways, the whole deal.
Yeah.
Like something straight out of a nightmare, all built for trapping and killing people.
We're talking like trapdoors, stairs that lead to nowhere, even gas lines running into rooms that he could control from somewhere else, right? I was reading about this, and it's like the level of planning is what gets me. It wasn't just about killing. It was about the whole system he built for it.
Exactly. And that's where you see his architectural skills and his, well, let's be honest, his totally messed up mind come together. Seems like he got off on controlling every little detail of how his victims would die. In The Devil in the White City, it talks about how he was always hiring and firing construction crews, different guys all the time, so no one person except for him would know how the whole building was really laid out.
Like he wanted to be the architect, the construction manager, and the executioner, all rolled into one. The puppet master of this horrible show he created.
And there were a lot of players in his twisted game. We may never know exactly how many victims there were, but we do know his crimes didn't stop at the castle walls. This guy had multiple wives at the same time, each of them clueless about the others, living in different parts of the city. And he was still pulling those insurance scams, too.
It's kind of hard to even grasp, you know? All that deception, all those different lives he was leading. How do you even keep track of that many lies?
Well, that's the thing about psychopaths, isn't it? Their minds don't work like ours do. They don't have those same moral boundaries. Take Benjamin Pixel, for example. He was someone Holmes knew, had even helped him with some of those insurance scams before.
This is the case where Holmes convinces Petitel to fake his own death, right? And
Mhm.
then, well, it gets even worse.
Way worse. Holmes actually kills Petitzel for real, and then, get this, he goes on to murder 3 of Petitzel's kids, too. It's just,
Hi.
it shows you how little human life meant to someone like Holmes. People were just pawns to him, disposable once he was done with them.
And it's not even like those murders were crimes of passion or he just snapped. It was all thought out, cold-blooded. It's chilling. How did he get away with it for so long? With all those victims, somebody had to have suspected something.
Remember that whole blending in thing we talked about? That act he put on, the charm? That took him a long way. Plus, back then, things were different. People disappeared. It wasn't easy to communicate like it is now.
Yeah.
It was a lot easier to get away with murder, plain and simple.
But even the smartest criminals slip up.
Mm.
What finally caused Holmes's house of cards to come crashing down? So all this scheming, all this trickery, it couldn't last forever. What was the thing that finally brought Holmes down?
You know, it's funny. In a way, it was greed. Plain and simple. The same greed that had kept him going all those years. He got caught trying to pull one too many insurance scams.
So the scams, they were his bread and butter, but they also ended up being his downfall.
Exactly. But this time, the law finally caught up with him. They started looking into his past, and things just kind of snowballed from there. Missing persons linked to him, inconsistencies in his stories. It all fell apart pretty fast.
And then the secrets of the murder castle, they all came spilling out. Can you imagine what people must have thought? The horror, the fascination, maybe even a sense of relief for those who always thought something was off about him?
Oh, it was huge. Front page news everywhere. Everyone was talking about H.H.Holmes, the monster who'd been hiding in plain sight. And the thing is, he seemed to love it. The attention, the infamy.
He even confessed to 27 murders, didn't he? But like you said before, there were probably way more victims lost to history, lost in the walls of that building.
Yeah, it's true. And even at his trial, he was just calm, collected, almost like he didn't care. There's this creepy story from the warden at the prison where he was executed, Moy-Mensing Prison. The warden said Holmes was the most unfeeling human being I ever met.
No remorse, even when he was about to die. That's almost worse than the murders themselves, you know? It's like his mind was completely disconnected from normal human emotions, from any sense of right and wrong.
And that's why his case still gets to people even now. H.H. Holmes, he's like a looking glass into the darkest parts of what a human being could be, the evil that can hide behind a normal face.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Oh.
That you can't always judge a book by its cover, that sometimes the real monsters, they're not hiding in the shadows, they're walking right next to us.
And that's why it's so important to learn about this stuff, to recognize the warning signs. We may not be able to get rid of the darkness completely, but we can learn to see it coming, to protect ourselves and the people we care about.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the twisted world of H.H. Holmes and his murder castle, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this?
You know, at the end of the day, knowledge is power. The more we know about cases like this, about how these criminal minds work, the better equipped we are to spot the danger signs, to stay safe.
We become more aware, more vigilant, and hopefully a little bit safer because of it. And to our listener, as you keep digging into this case, ask yourself this. What is it about H.H. Holmes that really sticks with you? Why? Is it the history, the psychology, or maybe those unanswered questions that still surround him? Whatever it is, don't stop asking questions. Don't be afraid to look into the darkness, because that's how we learn to keep ourselves safe from it.